Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight for the presentation, River Herring on the Shawsheen, Migration, Monitoring, and Management. A few guests with us tonight will be discussing the larger scope of river herring and Northeast regional herring monitoring. To start, we'll be learning from Jon Honea, professor of ecology at Emerson College. His research focuses on the influence of environmental change, including restoration and climate change, on species, populations, and communities of organisms. He's the conservation commissioner for the town of Andover, Massachusetts, where he has led the Shawsheen fish count in partnership with Andover Trails. And then following Jon's first part of the presentation will be Eric Hutchins. He's a Gulf of Maine habitat restoration coordinator for the NOAA Restoration Center in Gloucester. He's provided technical and financial assistance to over 300 habitat restoration projects through the Gulf of Maine, including dozens of dam removals and fish ladders. Tonight's presentation has been coordinated by MRWC, Merrimack River Watershed Council. My name is Tyson Morrill. I'm the restoration project manager at MRWC. And we're really just trying to highlight the impact of the spring river herring runs throughout the Northeast and how folks get involved through some herring counts and kind of some work that can be done at a larger scale. So towards the end of the presentation, we'd ask that you put some questions through the Q&A section here. The presentation will be recorded, and you can receive the recorded presentation after the fact. We put on our YouTube page as well. And we'd like to ask that all folks, if possible, remain muted, and we'll try to call in folks towards the end if you can't get a question through the Q&A section. So, Jon, you're up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Tyson. And I'd like to thank the Merrimack River Watershed Council for this forum and supporting the count and giving us this opportunity to tell people about it. Yeah, so my name is Jon Honea. I'm a conservation commissioner for the town of Andover and also a professor of ecology at Emerson College. And I want to tell you about the river herring work we've been doing on the Shawsheen River. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So the Shawsheen River is a tributary of the Merrimack River. It's this one here. It's one of the very last tributaries, probably the last major tributary before the Great Stone Dam in Lawrence, which I just learned was the largest dam in the world when it was built in the 1840s. So the Shawsheen River is special in the respect that the fish that have access to it, the anadromous, if I can say that word, that means migratory fish who live their adult lives in the ocean, then come back to freshwater systems to spawn. These migratory fish, they can make it, if they can spawn in the Shawsheen River, they can make it all the way back to the Gulf of Maine. So that's one reason why restoration efforts have been focused on this particular river. We took out two dams about 5 years ago in 2016, the winter of 2016, 2017. We took out this one that was built in the 1820s by William Madison Wood for the administrators of the American Woolen Company, which had a building right next to that just to produce some white noise to help them to relax at work. So that was its only purpose there. And it had other ecological effects, obviously, as we'll talk about in just a second. The other dam that we removed just before that is just upstream, and it's much older. I've seen records going back to the early 1800s where it was a mill that made flannel, but right next to it is a mill building called Powder Mill Square that's famous for making gunpowder for the Revolutionary War. So presumably there's been a dam there for a couple of centuries at least. And yeah, that's no longer existing conditions. They're supposed to crush that out now. And so when the dam removed, we figured that river herring would be one of the first fish to respond. So let me tell you a bit about river herring. So these are the fish that we're talking about, and we're not talking about these guys, or wait, we're not talking about these guys, the ones that you are familiar with in a can. Those are a close cousin of river herring. Those are Atlantic herring, the one you see on the bottom here. The river herring do spawn in freshwater systems while the Atlantic herring don't. When they're in the ocean, when the river herring are in the ocean, they'll often school together with Atlantic herring. And that's actually one of the problems, because one reason that their numbers are down is because of overharvest, and some of that is from bycatch from the Atlantic herring fishery. So there are actually two species of river herring. There's alewife and there's blueback herring. And although you can all see a really obvious difference between these two different types of fish, I guarantee you that's just a trick of the light. These are really hard species to distinguish from one another, and often experts in this area have trouble doing it, especially at earlier life stages. The easiest and clearest way of doing it, without a DNA analysis, is to cut them open, and the blueback herring have a darker abdominal cavity. But because this is a species of concern, we don't want to do that. Plus, that's just a whole lot of work. So any of you guys who have seen Blue Planet or any of those documentaries focused on oceans are familiar with these types of fish. River herring are a common bait fish, along with menhaden and Atlantic herring, that are really important for the base of the food chain for almost everything else that has a mouth big enough to fit a river herring in it. And their habitat goes from, so blueback herring go a little bit further to the south into Florida than alewife, and they both extend all the way up the coast of the United States and into Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. This picture came from NOAA, so it was focused on the US, obviously. So their life cycle, they begin to come up into freshwater systems along the East Coast in April and June, and they respond mostly to water temperature. So they come first in the south and then slowly work their way north. And here in this area, most of the fish return in April and June. And in the Merrimack, because it's draining most of New Hampshire, the water is much colder than other regional rivers. So our fish tend to arrive a little bit later than, say, the Parker River and the Essex, and of course the rivers on the Cape. So they'll come in April and June. The alewives usually come first, about a week or two before the blueback herring, and they tend to prefer spawning in lakes and ponds, although there's a lot of overlap has been noted. And they'll lay between 60,000 and 30,000 eggs, and the blueback herring don't lay quite as many eggs. They'll come, as I said, upstream a couple of weeks later, and then their eggs hatch after a week or so. See if this will progress. Yeah, their eggs hatch after about a week or so, and then the juveniles will rear in the freshwater systems for a few weeks, and then around towards the end of the summer, they'll start making their way back downstream towards the ocean, where they'll rear until they're mature, and they'll repeat the process. And it usually takes them 4 to 5 years to mature. The males may mature at 2 to 3 years. They mature a little bit older or a little bit younger than the females do. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere. And everything eats them. It's like when they come upstream, you might not be surprised that herons would eat herring. I have to always be careful with my enunciation there. River otters eat them. Bald eagles do. Seagulls do. Sport fish do, and that's why they're also important to humans as well. And humans traditionally, and still in Maine, where you have large runs, like to eat river herring. They're rich in those fatty omega-3 fatty acids that our doctors and dietitians are always telling us to eat, and they're also really tasty. And they used to be ubiquitous on the East Coast and extremely numerous. In fact, I read a little bit, I was really surprised about a month or so ago, not super surprised, but that when the settlers first arrived and were developing fisheries, the river herring harvest was more valuable than the cod harvest, which is one of the reasons that the settlers came to North America in the first place. So these are super valuable fish. They were most likely the fish that was part of that story that we always hear about, the Indians teaching the Pilgrims how to fertilize their corn, for example. And so they were harvested in huge numbers for these purposes and to eat them directly. And as I suggested earlier, now they're a species of concern because they were harvested so thoroughly, especially once industrial harvesting started happening in the 40s and 50s, and their numbers began to plummet. And then finally, in the early 2000s, or I'm sorry, in the late 2000s, a moratorium was passed in Massachusetts, and now harvest is no longer allowed. Unless the numbers get large enough with monitoring, verified by monitoring, that the managers of a particular river are able to develop a management plan, and then it may be possible to start harvesting again. To my knowledge, there's only one river in Massachusetts that has numbers that have recovered large enough to be able to do that, but they're not anxious to open up harvest on their river because they're afraid, and probably rightly so, that everyone will come to their river once the harvest is allowed there. So for those reasons, we're trying to monitor recovery on lots of other streams and promote recovery on lots of other streams so we can bring back their numbers. All right, and to give you an idea of some of the challenges of these fish, this is from the master's work of Steve Maddox from UMass Amherst back in 2016, where he documented the connected rivers historically and compared to what had happened after we built all the dams to support the Industrial Revolution. And so we have just fractions of a percentage of the historical habitat from the Connecticut River all the way around to the Merrimack River. And just to give you an idea of what they're up against, there are 3,000 dams in Massachusetts. And although this seems, and it is a huge problem, many of these dams, more than 85% of them, no longer serve their original purpose and no longer serve any purpose except for historic and aesthetic values. So they provide an opportunity for us to open up these habitats. Certainly there are many important uses for dams. These were very valuable during the Industrial Revolution. And some dams currently help protect us from floods. They provide electricity, or they just provide irrigation water for crops or drinking water. But most of these dams, the vast majority of these dams, don't serve any of those currently valuable purposes. And in fact, they have costs that weren't considered or that were minimized when the dams were built. Obviously, they block passage of migratory fish like the river herring that I just described, and their close cousin, the shad here, which has a really similar life cycle. It's just a little bit larger. And then we have the striped bass, which like to eat both of those. It's also a migratory fish following those. And then in some rivers, historically, even in the Shawsheen, we had Atlantic salmon, although the habitat probably wouldn't support that today. And we also have other migratory fish that lots of people don't think about. Lamprey, for example, are really interesting fish. And when you see one of those swim by a count location, it's always really impressive, I think. Pretty cool. And then we have the fish with the opposite life cycle, the American eels, which live most of their lives. They rear into adulthood in freshwater systems and then migrate out to spawn and reproduce way out into the Atlantic. And then the babies, the larvae or the eggs hatch into larvae, and then the larvae make their way all the way back to freshwater streams on the East Coast. It's just a really amazing life cycle. And all of these fish are extremely hindered by dams, obviously. And dams have other costs besides just blocking habitat for valuable migratory fish. Water that moves has power. That's why it erodes things. That's why rivers occur in channels. That's why floods can be so, it's one of the reasons why floods can be so damaging. But when you put up a dam, you stop the movement of water. And when that water that had been moving and carrying sediment suddenly stops, it drops its sediment load. And just to give you an example, this Conowingo Dam on the Susquehanna River in Maryland drops 2 million tons of sediment every single year. And that happens behind every single dam in the world. So every single dam is slowly building up sediment, and that's sediment that would have made its way into the ocean. I'll get to that point in just a second. And this gives you an idea of the density of dams all over the Northeast. Most of these were old mill dams, and actually all of these in this figure were from old mill dams that no longer serve their original purpose. And so that sediment that's not making its way downstream all the way to the ocean is no longer replenishing our beaches as they get eroded after almost every storm. And that's causing erosion all up and down the East Coast. And in fact, a report that was published in 2010 found that, oh, my animation disappeared. Almost 70% of the beaches along the Northeast coast are eroding. And of course, some of that's happening because of climate change. The sea levels have risen somewhere between 8 and 9 inches in different areas of the coast, depending on the patterns of current. But also there's a huge lack of new sediment coming from rivers as it's being trapped behind dams. Dams can also be really dangerous. There was a dam a little bit lower on the Shawsheen River where a young man actually died in the 80s in a canoe race after his canoe turned over after passing over the spillway, and he and his companion got trapped in the vortex, and luckily his companion escaped. So these can be dangerous on the river, and they can be dangerous when they fail. Especially these old mill dams are often privately owned, and because they're not serving any purpose, nobody's maintaining them, they start to degrade over time, and many of them are not in good shape. And when we have these large rain events like what happened here, this is from South Carolina back in, I think, 2015, that failed and devastated the area downstream of it. That almost happened in 2008 in Taunton. A dam just upstream of their downtown seemed to be about to fail. They evacuated the downtown, and it caused a huge amount of concern. And so for those reasons, these old mill dams can be dangerous, right? And so you could buy insurance, which can cost $5,000 to $15,000 a year, which is a hard cost to justify if it's not serving any purpose for the owners. On the other hand, you can remove the dam, and often there's funding from the federal government, from state governments, and from environmental groups that mean that private owners don't have to pay as much money to get rid of their substantial liability. And that's what happened in the town of Taunton 8 years after their dam almost failed. And it is one of 40 dams, or more than 40 dams, that have been removed by the Mass Division of Ecological Restoration since, I think, 2005. So a lot of interest has gone into removing these old mill dams to minimize those costs that I just described, and to open up habitat for migratory fish, which are really important sources of food all along the food chain. So this is returning back to the dams on the Shawsheen River. We studied it for a number of years. It took almost 10 years of fundraising and proving to ourselves that it wasn't going to undermine this bridge upstream and have other negative environmental impacts. But finally, in this particular dam was removed in the winter of 2017, I think in January and February. And it was a really cool procedure, the way they did that. And Eric may talk about that some more, I'm not sure, but there's certainly lots of cool reports from DER about how they do their work. And then the other stream or the other dam just upstream of that, sorry. Okay, sorry, so we went from this with the dam to what it looked like afterwards. And then the one just upstream of that was removed about a month before that, and it went from these conditions. So this is us removing it in the winter of 2016, 2017. And it went from this condition. This is me standing on the dam, taking a picture upstream of the impoundment, upstream of the dam of the impoundment. And it went from this to this right after the restoration work was finished in March of that same year. And we immediately started our river herring count, thinking, just in case the river herring might respond. And one point I should make before I start moving on to the river herring is one concern that people have about these dam removal projects is that you'll end up with a mud pit after you drain these impoundments. But the managers of these things and the conservation commissions who are responsible for overseeing this, and the state and the federal government who are also responsible for this, always make sure that invasive species aren't going to come in. And so there's lots of restoration work that happens. So that summer, this is what it looked like. So not a mud pit. And this actually, I think, looks way better than that old impoundment did. But anyway, it's certainly not a mud pit. And so, as I said, we hoped that first year that river herring would respond because we knew they were down, or we expected that they were downstream of there. And so this is the river right here. And the upstream dam was here, the one I just showed you. And there was a downstream dam further along out of the screen to the top of my screen. So in between the two dams, we found a bridge. And I think actually Eric Hutchins and Bob Douglas, our director of conservation, identified this dam as a great location to do the count. This is what it looks like. It's a nice pedestrian bridge, so it's very safe. Cars aren't going over it at the same time. And there's parking all around it. And you can just look down and watch the fish going by, especially after we put down these, we call them contrast plates, just to provide contrast to be able to see the fish, because they have dark dorsal sides, so predators can't see them. That makes them really hard to count. So we put down these substrates so they'd be easily visible as they go across. And this is the team that put it in this year. Most of these guys, that's me on the right, and everybody else is a member of the Massachusetts chapter of the Native Fish Coalition. It's led by Bob Dalton right here. And they designed the plates and they built the plates and they helped me put them in. So I want to thank those guys. They've been fantastic supporters of the count for the last several years. So, and we recruited volunteers from all over the community to come help us count the fish. All you have to do is watch the stream for 10 minutes and then record the number of fish that you see. So we had lots of people coming from all over the community. Before COVID, we had about 300 people participating. And then during COVID, it went down to about 50 people, both of the past 2 years. So we're hopeful that we'll have more people participating this year. So, and we often had school students coming from the high school that's less than a mile away. And so they come help count. We had probably 200 high school students. And this is what they're looking for. So this is the river herring, in case you're wondering what they look like and how to tell them apart from other fish. They're about anywhere from 9 to 15 inches long. And there's a couple of fish that are a similar size, and they look completely different. So the state stocks the Shawsheen River with trout. And so there are lots of trout that like to hide under that bridge because it's a nice, safe place from predators. And they're territorial, so they'll be fighting each other for space, and every now and then one will be kicked out from underneath the bridge, and you'll wonder, was that a river herring? But if you notice, they have really much more rounded heads. Here, I'll put them both up. So the trout have much more rounded heads. The river herring have more narrow heads and very deeply forked tails, whereas the trout, their tails aren't forked at all. And the behaviors are just really different. Where the trouts tend to be by themselves, the river herring are often, not always, but almost always in groups of at least 2. And last year we saw a group of 20 fish. So we're hoping, but more commonly it's like 3 to 5 fish, at least in our stream, while the numbers are still growing. So my daughter here is modeling the signs that we put up. This is a permanent sign that's always there showing the location. This was put here by that Mass chapter of the Native Fish Coalition. This is for the count, and I'll put a close-up of that in. And it has a QR code here that you can point your phone at, and it'll bring up a data sheet where you record your observations, right? So that data sheet has a picture of the pictures that I just showed you of river herring and trout, so you'll be able to reference those and have an idea of what you're looking at. And you just record first the date of your count. So this is showing the data sheet. So you record the date here, and you can just do all that on your phone. You record the cloud cover and whether it's raining or snowing. Some years, the weather's not as good as it is this year, and we start when there's still snow on the ground. And then you record, whether the water was clear or not. After a rain, when the water's high, sometimes the water's really turbid and it's really hard to see, and we like to keep track of that. When did you start your 10-minute count? And feel free to do multiple 10-minute counts, but please record each one in this data sheet. Let me go back here, yeah. And then you record the number of river herring that you observed going upstream. And if you happen to see any going downstream too, you would subtract that from your total. And then if you don't see river herring, which I'll admit is fairly common, especially right now before the run has really started, then you'll write, of course, a 0 there. And those zeros are super important data. A lot of people think it's not important and we don't care about the zeros, but the zeros are actually super crucial. It tells us when we know that fish aren't there. So we can get a really good idea of when they first arrive and when they're not moving very much. So please do record your zeros if you're able to help out. And so then you also, after you record the number of river herring that you see, we also ask that, you know, record other things that you might see. And I'll give you some examples of those in just a bit. And then we also have some check boxes in case you want to get updates, newsletters from, and those don't come out very often, probably only less than once a month, I know, in the case of Andover Trails, and the same thing with the Merrimack River Watershed Coalition. And then a place for your email if you want to leave that, but those are optional. And then just hit submit. So that's all it takes to participate, and you can participate anytime you want. Come by anytime you have a spare 10 minutes to watch the river. And these are the results that we've gotten from the volunteers. So we're not watching the river the whole time. We need at least 9 counts, so 90 minutes of watching the river during a day, randomly dispersed across the daylight hours. And then we send those observations to John Shepard with the Mass Division of Marine Fisheries, where he uses an algorithm developed, I think, by Gary Nelson, also with Division of Marine Fisheries, to estimate what the total run size is. He's essentially assuming that the same number of fish are moving when we're not watching as are moving when we are watching. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's essentially the story. So over the 5 years that we've recorded migration so far, we've recorded numbers that are anywhere from about 500 to last year we had not quite 3,000 fish. And you notice there are around some of these things, some of these averages, pretty large error ranges. And that happens when we don't get enough eyes on the river, when we don't get our 9 counts a day. So please do help us to narrow these error margins to get a better idea of exactly how many fish are spawning in the Shawsheen River. And this, we've also compared our numbers to the number of fish moving on the Merrimack and that are recorded at the elevator at the Essex Dam, that Great Stone Dam that I described earlier. So this is our data with the Merrimack data. And they haven't published theirs for a couple of years, and I'm still tracking down theirs. I know it's available, and I just didn't have time to finally track down the Merrimack numbers. But for the years that we have numbers, the scale, the increases and the decreases tend to match as we would expect the Merrimack numbers. So, oh, I did mention that it's possible that you'll see other things besides river herring. So just to give you an example, these are white suckers that we saw spawning. That we saw spawning almost immediately after we put the contrast plates down. And these fish or others like them were spawning for about a week. And so they provided a lot of entertainment before the river herring arrived. So that's the same one. Is it gonna let me go to the next slide? Okay, yeah. The next slide. And this is another species that we'll see a little bit later usually. These are larger. The contrast plates this year are just a little bit bigger. These are actually carp coming from the Merrimack River also to spawn. And they come about the same time as river herring. These are really big fish. At this point, I didn't have my scale markers on the contrast plates, but now I have markers that show 1 foot to give people a better idea of how large the fish are that they're seeing. This is actually from the first year, back in 2017. And this is a fish that was recorded by Floyd Greenwood one of our conservation commissioners here in Andover, and Ben Gahagan, the river herring expert in the region with the also with the Mass Division of Marine Fisheries, he identified this as a gizzard shad. So we expect that shad are also moving upstream. So that's a different species than American shad that most people think of when they think of shad, but still super cool. And then see if you can figure out what this is. I'm almost done. Oh, better. This is the pedestrian bridge. Get rid of that, sorry. And this image was taken by one of the high school students. Can you tell what that is? What if I zoom in a little bit? I can zoom in just a bit more to see if you can tell what this is. Most of you have probably guessed. So this is a really large snapping turtle. Its carapace is almost 2 feet in diameter. And we don't see these very often. Usually we see them only about once a year. But so there's all kinds of other stuff you may see besides river herring. In fact, over the weekend, I saw a really large beaver, and I haven't seen a beaver there in a long time. We see muskrats, we've seen mink, turkeys, we see turkeys everywhere, I guess. But there's lots of stuff to see there. So the address is 15 Stevens Street in Andover. It's this thing right here, and you can park in the very back parking lot of Atria Senior Living, or you can also park here in the Stop and Shop parking lot, and there's a stoplight with a crosswalk, pedestrian crosswalk here, and then you can just walk over to the pedestrian bridge. So either of those options is available, and you can come anytime now between now and say the early part of June, depending on the temperatures and when they stop. And I'll send out an announcement. If you're interested, you can use that data sheet to enter in your, or you can just email me if you like. Just give me your contact information. I'll be sure to send out everyone updates. The next update I'll be sending out to my email list is when we start seeing fish. And then I'll send out another one, or by fish, I mean river herring. And when we start seeing lots of river herring, hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll send out another blast just to let people know when there's a good chance that they can go and see some fish. So 15 Stevens Street in Andover, contact me here. And this is actually an underscore. So Jon_Honea at emerson.edu. And that's my story. So now I'd like to hand the baton to Eric Hutchins, who really helped get all of this started, and he's helping get a whole bunch of other rivers started. So let me stop share here. Okay.
Thank you, John. That was very informative. Just quick to pass off to Eric. We have a couple questions, but maybe pass them off to the end here. We have the time marked down for folks that want to follow back up with your contact info and some directions to the parking and everything for the fish count. So wrap that up towards the end as well, just to reiterate where folks can join. So,
okay,
Eric, welcome. Thank you again, and appreciate any insight you have to add to John's interest and passion towards river herring, and how some other folks can get involved as well.
Great. Out of curiosity, is my screen sharing right now?
If not, I see you.
Interesting. Okay.
Julia might have, I think Julia maybe gave you permission, but check.
Not yet. It says, yeah, I've canceled and I don't have the choice to share yet.
Okay, Eric, give it a try now.
Let me cancel and try again. Yeah, when I hit share screen, it goes to a screen that says, oh wait, maybe it's this allow here.
You have
Share.
4 different options, Eric, of what you can choose. You can choose a tab, choose a window, choose your full screen.
All right, share screen. I'm not seeing it. I hit share screen. Oh, okay. Advanced screening. Who can share? Host only. That's not what I'm looking for. All participants. Share screen. When I hit share screen, it is not giving me the share option. It's giving me cancel option. So I think you guys are going to have to show this one.
Okay, that's totally fine. That's what we came here prepared to do. So I will pull up your presentation, Eric, and then you're just going to have to give me a little cue
Yep.
And I'm happy to do it. All right.
Great job, John, and welcome everybody. She'll get that booted up here in a second. We have a lot of trouble with our federal computers with Zoom. We're not allowed to download the software, which seems to often create issues. This will be a shorter presentation. I'm hoping to target this to be right around 15 minutes. So I'm going to kind of fly through. I'm not going to touch on the Shawsheen River because John did such a good job at it, though I worked on the 2 dams downstream that he referenced, as well as I've had my eyes on for years, the Ballard Vale Dam, and we worked on some feasibility work there a number of years ago. And we're hoping that opportunities for fish passage at the Ballard Vale Dam will emerge someday in the not so distant future, which will actually open up tremendous amount of river herring and other diadromous fish habitat upstream of the Shawsheen River. We'll have to wait on that one. So anyway, title of my talk tonight, 20 years of removing dams and involving the public. Zero is okay. As John mentioned, it really is. I've worked on a number of these projects with fish counts, and I can't overemphasize that. People get bored not seeing fish when they go to do their 10-minute count, but that 0 really helps with the statistical analysis of any of these counts anywhere in the East Coast that we're working on, so that we actually get a much better estimate of actually what is going on. Okay, next slide. Okay, this little artwork here, this is actually inside of a bridge down in Plymouth. They're actually promoting migratory fish art all over the town down there in Plymouth, Mass. I'm going to show you a couple of nice slides from Plymouth. Actually, this is about me. Eric Hutchins. I'm with the NOAA Restoration Center, as my introduction was before. And I have predominantly focused on dam removals over the past decade now, all throughout the Gulf of Maine, but with a certain elevated level in Massachusetts alone. Partly because it's where I'm from, B, it's where we get a lot of activity, and my office is in Gloucester, but I've got projects in Maine, New Hampshire, and I actually had the opportunity to be involved in the first proactive dam removal in Nova Scotia a little over 10 years ago, which was really exciting. The why? National Marine Fisheries Service. The one thing I try to overemphasize to anybody, these projects are about the local community, but they extend significantly further. The National Marine Fisheries Service, our primary mission is restoring and managing marine resources, which includes commercial and recreationally important species such as cod, haddock, bluefin tuna, bluefish, marine mammals, many of which all will eat blueback herring and both species of river herring. So it's really important to restore these stocks of fish. They are even though there's some bump ups in their stock sizes throughout the East Coast, overall, they're at all-time historic low size in the East Coast of the United States. We don't even have good data from what it used to be long time ago, but they're even worse now than they've ever been recorded. So everything possible is being done. Our agency is getting a lot more funding this year to help restore them as well. I'm sure some of you will see some of those announcements when they come out. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to touch on, she has a different version, but only one slide is different. I'm not going to touch on the Ipswich Mills. I'm going to touch on the Little River Project in Gloucester, Town Brook in Plymouth, and the Millbrook in Rockport. These are 3 project sites that I've worked with volunteer fish counters as well as conducted habitat restoration. And I thought they were really good examples to present some of the successes and maybe some of the headaches as well. And an opportunity to show you some super slides tonight too. This is a slide by Keith Ellenbogen down in Town Brook in Plymouth. He takes just absolutely fantastic underwater photography, and this is one of the slides he shared with me. So I'm going to start with the Little River in Gloucester. Next slide. This happens to be actually my hometown. I was born in Rockport and then moved to Gloucester in grade school, and it's been really exciting to have the opportunity to actually do habitat restoration in my hometown. And I sometimes use these as my pilot projects to learn how to do it other areas, because when you're doing projects in your hometown, take my word for it, I know how hard it can be. I'm not just the federal person that comes to your town and doesn't have to deal with the heat and the flack of doing disruptions to river systems and getting permits. Doing it at the local level is harder than anything, and I realize that. But anyway, here's a couple of slides of this site. Bunch of impediments. There was a couple of small dams here, but for the most part, a water treatment facility built just prior to the Clean Water Act in the 1970s. And they built a sludge lagoon just downstream of the water treatment plant, discharged the sludge, the byproducts from the water treatment plant into this lagoon, and then it, on the left-hand picture, and then it discharged over where into the stream. Believe it or not, Little River, if you look at that left-hand picture, that wall of concrete and the lower wall, the entire river ran between those two walls. And the sludge, anytime it rained, overtopped the sludge lagoon and dumped literally on top of the stream. Not a good situation. About 500 feet up from the sludge lagoon was the top end of this. It was a fish ladder, about 500 feet long. And this was our counting station. Picture taken in 2011. That's how small this stream is. All of the water, unless it was a storm event, would run through that little orifice right there at the top of the fish ladder, and then make their way up to a small pond, another quarter mile upstream, half mile. Great location for the public. Absolutely fantastic to count fish. And that's how safe this site was. You could step across the entire river with one step. There was safe parking nearby, and it was like similar to Andover, a great place to see other species. So we make sure that anyone that does counts here records the birds and snakes and everything else they see. Next slide. Okay, this took many years to get this project, similar to many, to fruition. But working with the city of Gloucester, NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Mass DER, literally went in and ripped up the entire sludge lagoon, ripped up the entire fish ladder, and built a naturalized stream system. That is it, mid-construction on the left-hand picture there in 2015. The picture on the right is at the counting station looking downstream. The picture on the left is looking upstream. At the top of the picture on the left is that counting station. Everything got ripped up. All the concrete got lugged away. Believe it or not, in this photo, the stream is still running. It's underground in a pipe called a bypass channel that allowed the construction to take place in the dry. I want to preface this project site as this is also the site where we actually have the longest fish count in Massachusetts, going over 20 years now of volunteer fish counts. It was originally led by Mass Audubon. Next slide. And this is what the site looks like now. The counting station on the right-hand side. This is in the summer, so it's not flowing as much. Those are rock structures, little pool riffles all the way down. And the ocean, I'm sorry, is right at the base of this. The Little River, the tidal section, is about 600 feet downstream. The picture on the left is where that sludge lagoon used to be. The sludge lagoon walls, the outer wall on the right-hand side of that picture was retained because there's a road up there. But everything else was removed, and it's now productive salt marsh. We actually get tidal flows that go under Route 1, that's 133 right there. And the tide comes up into that lower section. So besides getting fish passage restored at this site, we created spawning habitat for rainbow smelt, as well as salt marsh habitat, and the fish have absolutely no impediment now making their way upstream. I actually measured one. He made it up the entire stretch in about 1 minute and 40 seconds. I was able to visually follow the fish, had absolutely no problem making it through the rock structures that we designed. Next slide. This one might be a tough one, but if you can read this, these are the fish counts. Actually, we get about 21 years of data from the Little River, and the Little River is very small. Take my word for it. It's about a 2 square mile watershed. And it did used to have back in the 70s runs up, estimated up in the range of 15 to 20,000 fish. But as you can see from this slide, back in 2000, we had almost 9,000. We had years where actually zero, no fish were seen. 2 of the years where no fish were seen. 2010, we didn't get enough data actually be able to spit out an estimate. This is a small run, 1,900 fish, 2,800. We don't expect this to ever go up significantly, but we still continue to get a real strong cohort of not just fish, but not fish, of public that wants to go here and count fish. City of Gloucester, as you know, is a big fishing port, and it's good they continue to do stewardship of their fish run. Next slide. Town Brook, Plymouth. I'm going to go through these fairly quick, a little bit before and after. We've done 6 dam removals on Plymouth. This is the last one that was done, a real big one. On the left-hand side, you see Holmes Dam in 2016. That's the wall of the dam. And you can see the stream, can't you? No, you can't, because it's completely underground in a tunnel. They actually took the river at this dam and stuffed it underground in a tunnel that ran for about 600 feet. The site did have a fish ladder that was about 600 feet long and was very poor for passing fish. On the right-hand side is the impoundment upstream of the dam. Next slide. And this is the site under construction. A little bit of an aerial view, not quite aerial, but me up on a hill. This was about, I believe, a $4.5 million project to rebuild a bridge, remove the dam, remove 3,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment, rebuild the park, the skateboard park. Really one of the single most expensive and complex and beneficial dam removals yet in Massachusetts. Next slide. This is just a different view. After the dam had been breached, you're actually looking right there at the dam where the water is going through that small section, and all that sediment upstream is the material that had to be excavated and lugged off to a lined landfill. It was about 3,000 cubic yards of material. Next slide. This just gives you an idea of what it looks like basically today, last year. It actually looks even a little bit nicer this year. We've got about a 9 to 12 foot wide channel, meandering stream. Over almost a half a mile of river reach was restored. And as far as fish counting, just wanted to point out to you that what looks like a rope going across the river at the base, that's an antenna. We actually had up to 14 antennas for monitoring tagged fish with pit tags, the same tag you have in your car for Easy Pass. Next slide. This is just another shot further upstream. Early on, 2020, all that rock is now filled in with vegetation and sediment, and actually the whole site looks completely naturalized. This is basically the first year post-removal. And the fish, we've found no impediment anywhere. The fish do not pile up anywhere in this stream. And we've got a run that runs anywhere from about 150,000 to 230,000 fish that run up this system. Much of them were maintained by trucking and transferring for decades. They would catch the fish down in the lower part of the stream and truck them upstream to the spawning habitat. Now they don't need that at all. They can make their way upstream on their own. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of a little bit of, this is the counting station on the left-hand side. We actually have an underwater camera in Plymouth now. That's one of the ways that we count fish. You can count fish in Plymouth right now on their online web camera, and you'll get a pre-recorded clip of fish that pass through. And this picture, if you notice that date, April 23rd, 2022, that's just from Saturday when they had their annual river herring festival. The last two were canceled due to COVID, and we have been waiting for the fish to arrive. The festival date was picked months ago, and as of Thursday afternoon, nothing but a trickle of fish had shown up, and we were getting very nervous. That we weren't nervous about the weather anymore because Saturday was looking good, but we were nervous about the fish. They arrived on Friday, April 22nd, and by Saturday of the festival, I was looking at a bare bones minimum of 80,000 fish in the river. And all of Town Brook is shallow and relatively narrow. And this is what you can see up and down the river. Wall to wall river herring making their way upstream. Someone did actually I did. When I was there, I did a 10-minute fish count yesterday. I'm sorry, on April 24th on Sunday, early in the afternoon. I got 456 fish at the top of the fish ladder. I looked at our database, and somebody I know counted 671 fish in 10 minutes. He said I almost couldn't keep up with the counting. It was like at his limit. Just count it as fast as he possibly could. I think that's a record for this site. We're hoping to see these kind of results after 5 dam removals. These runs can become tremendously huge, and we're hoping that Town Brook will show that this year. Next slide. Visit Plymouth River Herring. That's their webpage, plymouthriverherring.org. If you want to do some fish counts online, take a look at it. Next slide. Attracting outside professionals. Some of these pictures, that's the guy taking with the scuba gear in the river. Those are all that cloud around him is solid river herring. They're just trying to stay away from him just a little bit. So many fish at this location that he could go in there and get pictures like this. Absolutely fantastic photography opportunity. Next slide. I'm going to go through these quick. Rockport, 2006, the Mother's Day storm, my hometown. I predicted, for the record, that this was going to happen if this dam was not maintained better. It was not maintained better, and the 2006 year flood blew it open. The upstream side of that dam was on the left-hand side, and it almost completely failed. The sediment behind the dam stayed there, but the whole river blew through the dam instead of going through the spillway. Next slide. But we saw this as an opportunity. The town decided to remove it. Isn't that horrible? The guy that's removed more dams than anybody in New England in my hometown decides to rebuild a dam. But there are not river herring in this system, and there was not a strong enough compelling reason that in the middle of a park to remove a dam on such a small watershed. And even though I advocated for it, the town decided to keep the dam and rebuild it. Basically, it's smack dab in the middle of town, smack dab in the middle of a park. But there was never fish passage here before or eel passage. And as part of the rebuild of this project, we had funding from FEMA to install a highly efficient eel ladder at the dam. I believe it's the first dam funded by a disaster by FEMA to include fish passage, especially for eels. Next slide. And there's the eel ladder that was installed as part of the project. Goes right through the new dam. That's the new dam. It came with a facade to look historic, even though it's concrete internally. And we saw this as an opportunity to start counting fish. So we started counting eels every year with volunteers in Rockport. Every eel that went up that eel ladder starting in 2016, we didn't have the trap for the first couple of years, was caught in a trap. So we caught all of them. We would count them once a day between April 1st and Columbus Day. Next slide. There's some of our student volunteers. I try to get students involved every year. Others, we get a group, different group every year. And it's the fact that it's right in the middle of a park. There are always people walking by. It is an absolutely fantastic location to have the public walking by saying, what are those? I train everybody about the biology, and it's a stewardship and education opportunity almost every single day, that in every moment they do the count. We see anywhere from 0. We get lots of zeros. We haven't caught one this year. We had the trap set April 1, and I think our highest day was up into the hundreds. And this is a relatively small watershed. Next slide. Those are the counts by year. 2016 was when it went in. Last year we had 1,729. We don't know what we're going to get this year, but really fun to actually share this with the public as the fish come in, and then the summary at the end of the year. Next slide. Questions? I think I just did my, just a little bit over my 15 minutes. And questions for both John and myself.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. That was wonderful. And I think it's a good addition to John's kind of location partnership specific with the larger scale, what folks are really trying to build as a regional and New England partnership for dam removals, fish passage in general for overall restoration. So in the meantime, there were a few questions that John, I saw you had answered, which that's a big help as well. So I'm going to read through those quick so folks can get a beat on kind of what was asked and how you answered. So one of the first questions was, how do you judge the water clarity? And John, you had answered, clarity is totally subjective. Just give your best guess. If you tell me when you're there, I can tell you what others thought. So you provide your email address as well. That's a great point, especially with conditions right now. You have some spring runoff, maybe a large rain event. It might trigger a run. water temperature, clarity, a lot of variation. So I think if you have anything to provide to that, I think that's a great piece of info, John. Yes, go ahead. That'd be wonderful.
Thanks, Tyson. And it just occurred to me, I end up improving the count every year because of great questions like this. And it occurs to me that I could add photographs of excellent, all the different categories. There's 3 different categories. There's excellent, I forget what the middle one is, and then there's poor. So I'll try to add that soon to the data sheet just to give people an idea. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, I think
I'm going to add it.
That's great.
I'd like to add a twist to John's water clarity parameter, and not to use the word excellent as in it's really good. And I'm going to tell you why. Because right now in Plymouth, the water is unbelievably turbid. And this is what you want to see someday. The fish are making the turbidity. There's so many fish going upstream. All their tails wagging on the water is churning up all the water. It's the dirtiest it will be until the algae blooms late this summer. But right now, if you look at the live camera in Plymouth, there's stuff pouring downstream because there's so many fish ripping the bottom apart, trying to make their way upstream. It's really cool.
So maybe I like that. So maybe I change it to clear and less clear and not clear at all.
Yes.
I wonder Secchi disc, it seems like in a situation like this, you're looking at shorter depth, maybe wouldn't be as feasible in this situation. But I think this is wonderful to have somebody that's maybe never seen a river herring before walk by this bridge, happen to read a sign, and be able to look down and know not only what's there, but what they can do to help. And I think seems like we've been able to hopefully convey that tonight, but then also the material you have on site can help do that as well. So no, this is wonderful. And every year, like you said, little improvements are awesome. So another question here was, when are you most likely to see herring? And that seems maybe a loaded question, but you answered they usually arrive the last week of April or first week of May. The largest numbers are usually mid-May.
Yeah, and that's totally temperature dependent. The alewives, which come first, they're usually responding to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the bluebacks like about 60 degrees. But remember that the key is they're coming from the ocean through the Merrimack, which is going to be substantially colder, whereas the Shawsheen flows from the Air Force Base north towards the Merrimack. So we're much warmer than the Merrimack. So anyway, that's just a little twist. Even though the Shawsheen might be perfect temperature for them, they have to wait for the Merrimack to become a good temperature.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Another question here was Town Brook Plymouth sediment. Why a lined landfill? And I think that was I think I was looking at where the sediment was removed from behind the dam and trucked away, I believe contaminated sediment. I think, Eric, you had mentioned some details on that, how much the quantity of sediment that was removed and transferred from the site.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, basically oils and grease, some metals, if I recall correctly. I only remember which ones, but basically too contaminated to be allowed to go downstream and too contaminated to go just into an open area. So they had to, and actually it was a lot of it, as I recall, was used, it was not so contaminated that had to go actually under the liner of a lined landfill. It was actually, much of it could be used as cover material for a lined landfill. So it was junky stuff with really bad stuff underneath it. It was it was being used as cover.
Interesting.
No, that is unquestionably one of our biggest problems with dam removal in our urban areas, suburban areas, even of New England, especially Massachusetts, is legacy contaminated sediments. Really, a lot of complexity, a lot of cost.
I think that makes sense, especially you mentioned dams. Dams are tied to industrial revolution, tied to any sort of mill, could anything from wool to chemicals. I mean, that goes back hundreds of years. So I think folks, when they maybe drive by a dam in their hometown, realize there could be the hundreds of years of legacy, I guess, problems backed up behind that dam, not only fish passage issues as well.
Yeah, what I like to explain to people is picture any factory, a dirty factory of any sort that you've ever been into. Town Brook and all these rivers were just covered with factories. Town Brook probably had 20 different manufacturing factories on it, making nails and anchors and shoes and everything. Everything disposed of into the brook. I find shoes everywhere. I mean, this is true everywhere. Everything, all the septic waste, all the oil, everything would have just simply been discharged right into the brook at all of our streams all throughout New England for 100 years plus, a couple hundred.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's good, realization for folks to maybe take an extra look at some of these situations in their hometown and maybe start to question what's going on and what they can do. So Julia asked a question here as well, as if you could explain the difference. I think Eric, difference between a fishway, maybe for like shad or herring, and an eel ladder.
Yeah, well, eels do the opposite of the river herring. They are catadromous, and they live their lives out for the most part in fresh water, though some stay in the brackish water. So it's the babies that are migrating from the Sargasso Sea, a little over 2,000 miles away, 2 to 3 inch glass eels that become pigmented when they hit freshwater streams, and they are usually in the sediment or in the vegetation making their way up the edges. They don't actually swim up a fish ladder in the sense of swimming. They wiggle up a fish ladder, and we send down a small discharge of water down an eel ladder, which can be quite steep. And within that fish ladder is a material that is most often used called ecmat, and it's been found to be one of the better types of material to allow elvers to go upstream. And I don't even know what it's used for. It's from France. For all I know is it's used for golf courses or something, or manufacturing. It's a product that actually works well. And the eels go up. It's like it's kind of like a sponge with open, like AstroTurf, but with closed cells of open cells, and they just wiggle their way up. A fish ladder, in the sense of for river herring or American shad, those fish are truly swimming up with their tail through the water column. And many fish ladders, this is why fish ladders alone often do not work for everything, because fish ladders typically have velocities that are too extreme for eels to make it up. So anytime you see a fish ladder somewhere, ask that question: where's the eel ladder? How come they didn't put one here? Not until even the past decade were anyone even installing eel ladders. It's very new, relatively speaking. We've been doing fish ladders for 100 years plus throughout the country. Eel ladders and attention to eels only in the past decade plus.
Wonderful. That's very helpful to know. And I think many folks maybe hear of an eel, they see it here and there in a larger lake, but the fact of elvers at the smaller scale in coastal regions versus a larger adult eel in a lake, it's hard to make that connection between those situations and, further out in the Atlantic Ocean where a lot of these eels might originally start from. So I think on the broader scale, just both of you folks to be able to chime in on if a citizen listening here or somebody that folks could speak to see something that maybe could draw concern or trigger some sort of influence for them to do something, or ask questions or make an impact at the town scale. I think you have multiple levels. You have a local town dam. Maybe there's been nothing done. The person maybe doesn't have some experience understanding what a fishway is, maybe just trying to learn more. You kind of have that scale. Then you have the other scale of, there are a lot of fishways, especially in the Merrimack River watershed, that were originally built for species like Atlantic salmon that maybe cannot pass eels, river herring, shad. So you have the next scale. So how do folks within their community maybe just become a better voice, or what should they look for? Kind of a one-off driving by out the window to maybe start asking more questions and make a bigger difference in their area.
I'll take a quick crack at it. I would always start with the local conservation commission. It's potentially at the federal level, state level, there are biologists available, but at your fingertips is to reach out to your local conservation commission, and depending on what the situation is, they should have the ability to direct you in the right direction one way or other, whether it's a violation or if it's an opportunity for restoration, or if it's just a question, they may not have the answer. But, usually a staff person at the Conservation Commission level will know, like Andover, they know to reach out to me, or if it's a question, they'll reach out to John, or they can reach out to the state folks. So it's always a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as a member of the Conservation Commission in Andover, we are well aware of all of the dams in our town, and we do try to keep track of their condition. And where possible, we're working to get rid of the ones that where the costs outweigh the benefits. One big caveat there is that a lot of these dams are privately owned, and so we can't just take something away from a private owner, but often it's in their best interests to get rid of the dam because they're responsible for that liability. And once they have a free-flowing river through their property, that can be a really nice amenity as well. So it's not really a loss.
That's wonderful. And that seems like both of you echoed the same point of start at your town scale, tap into your local volunteers like you both that really contribute to the conservation commissions. And I think that's a great source to start and really learn from there. Just to reiterate, so for both of your presentations, the contact info and it's a parking descriptions for John's overview and the final details of how to join a fish count began at about 29 minutes of this presentation. And then Eric's contact info was around 33 minutes. So folks, get a hold of this recording. We'll have to zoom back in and find some more details. That's a great way to start. Julia, do you have anything else to add? I think this is just quite the wrap. Appreciate it.
Tyson, there is one other question in the Q&A,
Yes,
which I'll take a quick crack at.
Well, I just saw that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it disappeared. But the question was about.
Oh, it went to answered. I can read it for you, Eric. It went to answered. What are the criteria for river herring restoration and other Merrimack River streams? Is there a stocking program to restore herring runs in these other streams, for example, Stony Brook and Chelmsford?
Yep. So I just wanted to touch on that. I actually don't know Stony Brook personally in detail, but the state and federal agencies just last year released a restoration comprehensive plan for the entire Merrimack River watershed, and an elevated level of effort is underway at local, state, and federal level to restore diadromous fish throughout the Merrimack River watershed. There are opportunities that are identified as high priority, which includes Concord River and Shawsheen, but opportunities sometimes aren't necessarily always identified on desktop. Sometimes an opportunity will emerge because someone says, I simply want to remove my dam. Or there's an initiative locally to say, let's get fish over this. So don't ever hesitate to raise an opportunity when you're aware of one. But there is a lot of effort going into the Merrimack now. Thanks.
Wonderful. And I think that's a great point as well. A lot of things you don't fall on a map, don't fall on a list. So local town scale participation is important. We had one more here. We have a little river in Haverhill where there's a push to remove a dam, just saying. So, I think it's a great idea that a lot of the funding through the COVID infrastructure is towards some of these projects. And, you get a little bit of delay, but quick plug for MRWC, working with collective partners is a good avenue towards targeting some of these projects at a interstate, larger scale to really work on some of these infrastructure and fish passes projects. So we'd like to thank Jon Honea and Eric Hutchins both for their wonderful presentations tonight, and hope that you can join some fish counts in the short term, and in the long term really be stewards for fish passage and especially river herring migrations, and really join the larger partnership that all of us have kind of committed to. So Julia.
Yeah, Tyson, I think you covered it all. You did a really great job. So thank you, everyone. If you have any residual questions, feel free to contact anyone on this panel. My email is julia@merrimack.org. You can reach Tyson at tyson@merrimack.org. This webinar is going to go up on our YouTube channel. We'll post it on our social media. So if you'd like to share it, please feel free. But other than that, thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful night.